So the other night I went out with a friend, and while I was out, I got a text message from Arlen saying, going to bed, chose not to do the dishes, relaxed instead. It was hard. Please forgive me. Please be kind.
That might be what it said. I don't know. I can't really remember. But anyway, yes, okay. You're looking at me.
So, of course, she doesn't have to ask for forgiveness, but it wasn't a typical thing, not in the fact that I expect her to always do the dishes. We kind of share that workload all the time. But really, I was actually just proud of her, the fact that she decided to prioritize her own self-care over these expectations that she's placed on herself. And so last week we introduced the general concept of self-care, and now we're going to go into some of the barriers of self-care. And so I think the best place to start is with this whole concept of mom guilt.
So John's right. Mom guilt is out there everywhere. It has been a hot topic on Instagram over at least the last year that I've really noticed. And when I polled you guys on Instagram back in spring, that was cited as the number one barrier as to why you weren't engaging in self-care. So we need to look at that today for that exact reason, because I think what John's saying, or I know, I guess what John's saying, is the expectation around what we place on ourselves as a mom, I guess, can lead to that mom guilt. But the question is it really mom guilt? And I would argue sometimes it is, but most times it is not. And it wasn't until recently that I read this book called Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown. Some of you probably know that title. You're probably a Brené Brown fan. I know that we are.
Definitely. Yeah.
Put it on to John, and I've had some great conversations with people around this author. If you haven't read any of her books, I suggest you read it. Going to put a link down below in our little write-up so you can click on it to see this book, Gifts of Imperfection, but there's also a couple other good ones. So in that book, she breaks down the definitions of guilt and shame and why that's important. You're like, okay, Arlen, this is about semantics. Why are we hearing this? I'm bored already. But hang on, because there's importance here in that. If we don't break them down, we then can't look at our thoughts in our head about them, and then we can't look at our behavior piece. So then we can't make the appropriate changes because we are not thinking clearly about what they truly are. So based on her book, we're going to break down the definition. So what is Brené Brown's definition of guilt?
So she defines it as the fact or state of having committed an offense, crime, violation, or wrong.
Okay, so that is more of a focus on our behaviors, and that can actually be a good thing. Guilt can be a good thing.
I think guilt is always a good thing.
Yes, it's a marker for us to kind of adjust our behaviors when things we're doing don't align with our beliefs and our values. So something just really basic like stealing, right? If we made a choice like that or our kids did that now, we know that that's not right. So we should adjust that and we should not steal. So that's more what that is about, a behavior. But according to Brené Brown, the definition of shame is...
She defines shame as an intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging.
Okay, unworthy of love and belonging. And I think in our example, we're really looking at ourselves, right? How we look and identify ourselves as humans. But in our example of self-care, when we look at unworthy of love and belonging, I think to myself that I felt like I was unworthy of the self-love in that moment, of self-love through self-care. So I went and chose to sit upstairs. I had a headache that night, actually. I went and relaxed and just kind of did something for me on the computer in bed before I laid down for the night. And so I think a lot of times women, or at least I can speak with women, but I think that, you know, mom guilt can be husband guilt, dad guilt, men guilt. I'm sure this happens in both, but mom guilt's more out there. So we're kind of focusing on that today. But I know for myself, I have expectations of what should be done. So when I think of the shame piece, I'm thinking I'm not a good wife. I'm not a good mom because my house is a mess. So an expectation that if he cooked that night, I should clean the dishes after. And I'm not a good wife because I didn't. And if I let my kids wake up in the morning and the kitchen's a disaster and they have to kind of go around that, I'm a bad mom because I didn't clean it up and have a spot for them to, let's say, eat their breakfast at the table. So it definitely goes one step further of how we label ourselves. But the problem with how we label ourselves is it paralyzes us. It stops us from moving forward. It stops us from making changes. It's really not healthy at all. And that's the problem, because if you look at guilt, like we said, can adjust behavior, but we look at shame, it just stops us. So going one step further, if we look at the definition again of guilt, what was the definition by Brené Brown?
The fact or state of having committed an offense, crime, violation, or wrong.
And did I do anything wrong by going upstairs that night? No. Did I commit a crime?
No, of course not.
No. It just didn't align necessarily with what I wanted in terms of an expectation, but it's not my values or belief system. I like a clean house, but that doesn't define who I am as a person. That just is something I enjoy and like to do and have.
Right. So, I mean, it's very key there that mom guilt can't actually exist without you doing something wrong, right? And so when we perceive something as wrong, then we move from guilt into shame. But if we remove that perceived and incorrect definition of guilt, we can't even move to shame, right?
Right. And that's what we shouldn't be doing, moving into shame. So now that we've named it for what it really is, mom shame, we need to look at how we remove it. Because when we talk about that Brene Brown definition of, seeking for worthiness and connection and love, that is what self-care is based on our previous definition. It is attending to our own physical and or mental needs. And like I said, I think those go hand in hand. So we need to get mom shame out of here. We need to make sure, like you said, label it correctly, but get it out of here so we can engage in self-care and an act of love within ourselves. Okay, so step number 1 is call it and label it what it is. It's mom shame. It's not mom guilt. Mom guilt does exist, and there are times and place for it. I don't want to undermine that because, for example, I talk about this on Instagram, but when I maybe yell or lose my temper with my kids, like we even talked about in the last video, it's a way to kind of gauge where we're at and saying, hey, you can do better. You need some time for yourself. And next time I want to be more patient and more calm because that aligns with the values that I want for my kids. But when I talk about the example of self-care and kind of label myself as a bad mom for not maybe having the laundry done, or I should go and prep dinner, or I should go spend some time with my kids right now because they're home today, and never prioritizing our self-care needs because there's always something first. Like I said, laundry, dinner, kids. Then that's when you start saying, hey, I'm a bad mom if I choose to leave my kids right now to go and do that self-care piece. I'm a bad mom if I leave the dirty laundry on the ground or the clean laundry we haven't folded to put away because I am choosing to go do something for myself. So we need to stop that train of thought. That's mom shame and it needs to end.
Exactly. So the second step is that we need to put it in perspective. And the best way to do this is pretend that your friend came and explained this exact scenario. So even our own scenario with doing the dishes. Of course, you would never judge that friend and say that they're a bad wife, husband, partner, anything like that. So you need to be as kind to yourself as you would be to your friend.
Totally. So number 3 is to connect with each other. And I say, yeah, go find a friend that's supportive, that you can confide in, who's going through similar experiences. There's great feelings of normalization through that. Hence this whole community that we're trying to build here on YouTube and Instagram. But I also am going to encourage you to go find your partner and tell them about that. Because if I wasn't sharing my self-care kind of experience there and telling John that I felt guilt over doing that and therefore shame for not having the kitchen cleaned, he would never know that. And he might even wake up the next morning and be like, that's our expectation. You wash the dishes when I do the dinner. And why didn't you do it? So by opening that dialogue, he understands me better. He knows when to kind of check in. He knows what is truly guilt, like I said, yelling at our kids, and when we kind of need that self-care, like we talked about in the last video. But then he also knows when it's shame and it's something that I shouldn't really be necessarily feeling, or I shouldn't be feeling. And he can kind of help me combat that, and we can kind of work as a team to kind of move through that. Yeah. So by doing these 3 things, labeling for what it is, kind of putting in perspective, and connecting with others around the topic, we can really just get rid of mom shame altogether. And then it can really just stop us from being paralyzed and moving forward. Because if we can remove it, we can look at where we want to make changes, like we said with the guilt, but then we can also engage in things like self-care. Because if we're not the best version of ourselves, we're never going to be the best version for others, like our partners, like our kids, like our friends, our family, right? We talked about this in the last video. So we need to remove these barriers. We need to start labeling mom shame for what it is, and you need to start being more aware of it. Because I really think that sometimes I didn't even know those thoughts were going through my head until I really slowed down and thought about, what is mom guilt? What is mom shame for me? And what does that look like? And when I identified that, I could share it with John. So that's our challenge for you. See if you can figure out where this might be happening for you and share it with your partner so they're more aware, so you can guys kind of work at combating mom shame. Thanks for watching. And next week, we're going to have another barrier of self-care that we can break down and look at in a different light so we can get more self-care in our lives. More time to ourselves.